So last week what we talked about was this idea that if we want to have a life of inner peace, and I've come to this realization over the holidays, because looking over last year I realized I was chasing a lot of things. And also when I started thinking about this year, I started filling my book with a lot of new goals that I wanted to chase this year, things I wanted to achieve, and I still want to achieve those things. But I realized that what I was really after was inner peace, a sense of just inner rest. And maybe you can relate to this. Maybe you've been in a season of your life where you've tried all these things and you've been busy, or you've been not busy, or you took a longer holiday than usual, just to sort of fill this void on the inside. And what it really is the sense of this longing for inner peace is what I discovered. Just the sense of letting go and letting God, in a sense, and just being okay with things. Rather than sort of constantly get up and chase life and chase things and making things happen and getting frustrated when they don't happen, I just got so sick and tired of it, to be honest, that I realized that there was something else that I was after, and it was this thing of inner peace. And so I started reflecting on this, and it's just to give some of you some background. And so what I learned was that the first thing on this journey, this first, I don't want to call it, let's call it the process, but this first phase, or this first thing that we need to understand when we're in this process of creating inner peace, of receiving inner peace, to just be okay with life and be okay with God and just doing life like He wants us to do, is we need to allow God to transform our minds. And I gave you some scriptures last week where it talks about allow Him to transform your life by renewing your thinking, renewing how you think about God Himself, how you think about you, and how you think about life. And I've realized in my short journey, with God over the last, 30, almost 40 years, I've realized that ultimately that is what needs to happen. Is that if you and I don't go through life allowing Him to keep on changing how we view things, our perspective, keep on changing us, let's call it our spiritual eyes, keep on tuning it, fine-tuning it, there comes a point if we don't do that where we just get stuck in a certain way of living, and it's almost like we can't grow any further. That's what happened in my life. But fortunately, through His grace, over my lifetime, I've had people coming into my life, situations coming into my life, events happening in my life that sort of just broke through that and propelled me into a new season, so to speak. But what I realized was that the first thing for you and me to receive this inner peace, to just have a life where we are utterly at rest and have this inner contentment in a certain sense, is we need to allow Him to change how we view Him, see ourselves, and see life. Because if we keep looking at ourselves and God and life the same way, we're going to keep getting the same results in life. Just how it is. If you keep looking at life and God and you like a child, you will keep getting the results of a child. Now, that's not a bad thing when it comes to faith. But the Apostle Paul said at some stage, you and I need to let go of eating milk, and we need to start living on some solid foods. We can't constantly keep living on milk as we grow up as spiritual people. And so the first part of that process, we need to allow God to transform our minds. And so last week I shared with you that the two parts of this mind that I think is important is the first part that needs to change is we need to allow God to create a mind of what I call a mind of possibility. Meaning that we need to allow Him to help us see that there is so much more possible in this world than we sometimes believe. I know that as I was growing up that I viewed God in a certain way, and that limited what I thought and what I believed was possible for Him. So verbally I would say, well, God's, nothing is impossible for Him and He can do all these things. But if you looked at my life, practically speaking, I very much limited Him through how I believed. And so I realized that we need to allow Him to transform that part of our mind. That part of our thinking when it comes to Him is that honestly nothing is impossible. And we need to allow Him to create what I call a mind of possibility. You and I turn up every day not looking at our day with frustration and, oh goodness, another day, but with excitement, because anything is possible, in the realm and in the scope of this one we follow. And the second part of that mind that I talked about is we also need to create a mind of acceptance, meaning that accepting that He can create anything, accepting that He works in ways that we don't understand, accepting that He can work through people and in situations and through events that we wouldn't have picked if we were the ones doing the picking. But we need to allow him to change our minds. Do you know how much I've been stuck in my own life in the past where I limited God because I in my own mind wouldn't allow him, obviously I wouldn't think this consciously, but I wouldn't allow him to work through certain people because they didn't look like me or sound like me or smell like me even, or had the same skin color, whatever it might be. So therefore God couldn't possibly work through those people or teach me anything of value. And that had to change in order for me to go into a next season. And it's the same for you and I, that in order for us to go into a next season, God has to transform that part of our minds, how we look at people and him and how he works, to create a mind of allowance or acceptance in a certain sense. So if we don't do that, we can end up becoming stuck. And so what I said to you last week was we need to resist this close-mindedness. It's what I call a close-mindedness, where we become blind in a certain sense. If we don't resist that, let's call it spiritual closed-mindedness, one of two things can happen. You can miss the things that God can do in life. And now I surely missed many things in my past of what he can do because I limited him in terms of how I saw. And it doesn't mean that I limited him, meaning that he didn't do stuff. It just meant that I missed it. And the other part is if we don't resist that spiritual close-mindedness, is we can miss what he is doing. See, when you and I just look at life a certain way and believing that God only works like this and only works like that and only through those people and only, then ultimately you and I can miss what he is actually doing right now around you in your life. And you could be spending all your time in prayer asking for certain things and asking for open doors and for this and for that. But the point is God might be answering you, but you might be too blind to see it or too deaf to hear it because you've limited how he speaks or how he shows himself in your life. And that will only change when we allow him to renew our thinking and renew our minds and how we look at life and him and ourselves. That's the first part of the process. Sounds simple, perhaps, but it's not that simple. The second part, which I want to talk about today, is once we allow him to start renewing our minds, and honestly I think it's a process, and I might be wrong in this, but I've only experienced in my own life that I don't think it's like one day you're kind of, you don't get it and the next day you do get it. I think there might be a moment like that where your eyes go open, it's like that song Amazing Grace, I once was blind but now I see type thing. But I think we need, that's a process. Our eyes keep, God keeps developing how we see and keeps improving that. And so once we allow him to renew our mind and start that process, there's a second part which is equally important. And it's going to sound very simple today, very easy, but I can promise you it's not. But I can also promise you that once you start doing this in areas of your life and ultimately all of your life, everything else will change. And this is this. Once we allow him to start changing our minds and renew it and transform it, we also need to learn how to start releasing our attachments or the things we are attached to in this world. Now I'll explain to you what I mean by this because I don't want you to walk out of this place today not getting this, because this will change your life. And Jesus has taught this, this principle over and over to his disciples and stuff that we can read anyway. And throughout Scripture, you get this principle of releasing the stuff that the stuff we get attached to, the things we cling to in this world. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this. So the first thing that you and I need to release, the first form of attachment that we need to release, and this is absolutely paramount, and I'm going to spend most of my time on this one this morning because this is the one that I've learned in my own life, kept me stuck so long. And it's only the times when, through the grace of God that I had some breakthroughs and I could go into a new season with him, it was only when these things shifted. And I call them attachments of beliefs. Attachments of beliefs. And what I mean by this is that ultimately you and I need to understand that as people, we are all conditioned. I said this last week, but I'm going to say this again because many people don't like hearing this, but it's part of life. We are all conditioned. That includes many of our beliefs are conditioned, meaning many of us are perpetuating beliefs that our parents have taught us, are perpetuating and just continuing beliefs that some teacher has taught us, and some of those beliefs have served us, some of those beliefs has helped us. But in my experience dealing with people in counseling and pastoral counseling, I've also come to know in my own life also that there are also many beliefs, even though there might be some that are helpful, there are many others that keep us stuck and keep us spiritually poor. And it's until we can release those attachments of beliefs, or the beliefs that come with certain attachments, it's until we can release those that we can allow peace to truly start flowing into our life, into our spiritual life, and transform our life. So oftentimes, our beliefs have attachments, and there are sort of two types of attachments. I'm going to share with you quite a few, but in terms of beliefs of attachments, there's a few I want to share with you. The first one is that ultimately these type of attachments of our beliefs, they do one or two things. They limit our ability to truly see the way that God wants us to see. See, when you and I believe a certain way and we cling to those beliefs and never allow them to be transformed, never allow them to grow, let's use a better, more empowering word, never allow them to grow and evolve, ultimately you can actually get to a point where that limits your ability to see. And I'll share with you a story from Scripture where that happened. But also the other thing that it sometimes does is it limits our ability to be open, our ability to allow God to move in and through our lives and the lives of people around us when we sometimes cling to these attachments of our certain beliefs. So I'll share with you a story quickly, and it's a very young story. You know both these stories very well. But I read this story last week, and I realized that even though, I've preached on this story many times, but there was a new dimension that sort of opened for me as I read it again. In John 4, it's the story where Jesus is thirsty, and he goes to the well, and he talks to this Samaritan woman, and he talks about her life, and he talks about living water and drinking from him as the living water, and, a person who drinks from him will never be thirsty again. You all know this story. If you don't know it, you can go and read it, John 4. But sort of towards the last part of the story, this woman asks Jesus a question and says to him, I can see that you're a prophet. So Jesus proves to her that he's a prophet. He knows stuff about her life, and he knows stuff about her relationships and so on. And so she says, I can see that you're a prophet. So I've got a question for you, because there's this burning question that has divided the Jews and the Samaritans to the point where they became enemies. So they couldn't stand each other at all. And it was this discussion or this debate about which was the real true place of worship. Was it in Jerusalem, which was the holy city according to the Jews, or was it this Mount Gerizim, this mountain that the Samaritans thought was the holy place of God? So they had this big issue. Which one is the holiest? Which is the true place of worship? And so she asked this question to Jesus, can you clarify this? You're a prophet. Clearly you know stuff. Can you tell me what it is? And so then Jesus replies to her, and I've read these words many times, but in the light of what I've been reflecting on, it just opened up in a whole new way for me. Jesus says to her, and you can read it on the screen, believe me, dear woman, there is a time where the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. But the time is coming, indeed it is here now, obviously referring to himself, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And the Father is looking for those who will worship him this way, for the Father is spirit. So those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Now, even though I can say much about this passage, I just want to say this. In a sense, when I read this, I realized that what Jesus did to help this woman into a new season of her relationship with God, he had to strip her belief around what the true place of worship was. He had to can it. He had to cancel it out. See, this lady was stuck in this debate and this inner thing about which is the real place of worship, which was a big deal for these people, to the point where it divided nations or a group of cultures. And Jesus comes and he says, no, you need to be able to see beyond this. You need to be able to understand that God is beyond this. He's not tied to a mountain or a place or a city. He is spirit. And there's a time coming where you must worship him in spirit and truth if you are a true worshiper, in a sense. And so ultimately what Jesus does here is he cancels, he rips apart what I call an attachment of that woman's belief that governed a big part of her life, we can assume. And so he rips it, he tears it up, and he gives her a new understanding. And we don't know what happens to her afterwards. What we do know is that she comes to the Lord, and so does a big part of, if not all of her village, all of her people. But that wouldn't have happened if Jesus sort of didn't change something for her. There are things in your life and my life spiritual things, ways that we view life and God and ourselves that keeps us spiritually poor and stuck in a certain season with Him. And it's until He comes to you and me like He did with this lady and rips that up and says, He gives us a new revelation, so to speak, of what is real and what is true. It's until that happens that you and I can move to a new season, into a new season. And it's only when that happens that peace really starts, permeating within us and flows through everything. That's one example. I'll share with you a personal story though. Many years ago, when I left school, I grew up in a very strict let's call it a strict Christian culture, especially the town I was in. And, we had churches on pretty much every street corner. And so I grew up in a place where we were taught good values and good moral values and Christian values and all these things. And honestly, I would not be here today if it wasn't for many of those things. So I honor those things. But as I grew up, as I went through life, I didn't realize just how blind I was for many things. One in particular was the issue between, different cultures around me. I was blind to it. I was completely oblivious to it. Because my parents didn't really push it in our home. It wasn't really a big issue for us, so I'm again blessed by that. But as I was growing up and I left school eventually, when I left school at that stage, I've been through many Bible camps and youth revivals and you name it. I was leading from the front. And I didn't miss one of them. And I knew the Bible and I could quote every verse that I needed to that suited me. Did all those things. And again, like I said, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that very, very important foundation. But my faith and my beliefs got put in a bit of almost like been put in a tumble dryer, so to speak. It got thrown upside down when I started my first day at uni. And it wasn't because of university, but it was one of my roommates, and he eventually became my best mate, and we were best mates for about 17 years, until we moved here and then that ended, but that's another season. But one of the things that I learned from, initially I was quite annoyed by it really, but I still remember to this day, it was one morning, it was my first morning of class. All of us, we lived in this little community, so we had all these students living in different rooms, and we had one lounge that we would walk into. So that's where you had your breakfast and your coffee, and that's where everything happened, and all the gossip happened, and everything happened. And so we would live in our little rooms and then come out. It's like ants going to there and then come out. And so this one morning, my first morning, so everyone was there. We were ready we were already registered, but we were ready to go to our different classes. And so one of the things that I did, being a very, very, religious person, and I'm very spiritual and all those things, I had a little stereo player, and those were the days of the tapes still. So I can just explain to Joshua what those is, but like tapes, so I had some tapes of this very, very famous gospel singer in South Africa, Louis Brits, and I loved his stuff. And he was like big on the scene at that stage with the youth and with students and so on. And I put it in and I just pretty much turned up the volume, so this gospel was, just booming out of my room early in the morning, and all the other guys were still like waking up, they hadn't even had their first coffee. And fortunately, the guy living next to me was also a very close mate of mine to this day. He's a lawyer nowadays, bless his soul. But, he lived next to me, also a very devoted Christian guy, so he was all into it. And so we were all like this one guy that I didn't know at that stage. Well, I knew him because I asked him to come and live with us. So he was already a friend, but I didn't know that much about him. He walked out of his room, I will never forget. He walked out of his room, which was just across mine. He walked out into my room, didn't say anything. He walked into my room and he turned it off. And he walked back into his room and he closed his door. Oh, well, that's pretty rude and pretty weird. Maybe I made a mistake asking this guy to live with us. Anyway, so I went back in and I turned it back up. The next moment the door opened again, and here comes a guy out, and he walks to my room and he turns it down again. This time he did say something. He turned around and he said to me, "Not everyone wants to listen to that stuff." Initially I was like really annoyed, and I was kind of offended by what he said, and he's also like a musician, so he loves music. Later on, I asked him about it, and he said, "Well, it's just not good music." That's what he told me. It wasn't because of the volume, he just said it wasn't good music. Initially I was offended by it, but as I started thinking about that event, and there were many events like that over the years, I started realizing that I saw life a certain way, and I thought, coming from a small town, that everyone viewed life in that way. My surprise when I realized that that is not the case. And throughout our relationship as friends, as the years went on, he taught me so many things. I believe God taught me so many things through him of how to view life and God and things in a completely different way. And I believe if it wasn't for that particular event and many other events after that, because I started realizing that, you see, I had this belief that some people are in and some people are out when it comes to God. Some people are in, some people are out. So if you don't look like me, you don't go to the Dutch Reformed Church like I did, and you know, all those type of things, you are out. My mate was out, clearly. He was out. But then I realized that that's not as simple as that. God is infinitely larger than that. And if it wasn't for that, chances are I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have been, wouldn't be here in New Zealand today, being able to, share in a different culture and a different language, because he helped me see that we're not all the same. And God moves as he wants through us and in us. But we in our own lives will remain stuck in a season with him if we don't allow him to transform that about us. We will remain blind for what God is able to do in us and through us. And I don't want to sort of get at this from all different angles, but it's so important for you to get this. The second story I just quickly want to share with you that I'm not going to be on it too long, but there's a different story in the scriptures. 1 Samuel 16, we all know this story. It's a very Old Testament story. When Samuel went to anoint David as king. And the story goes that Samuel turns up at this house and he sees all these big guys and David's brothers, and he thinks, but the one is maybe that's God's choice. Surely that's the one. He's big, he's strong, he's handsome. Surely that's God's choice. And then God goes through all of them, and God says to Samuel at some stage, he says to him, "Don't judge by his appearance," talking about David's brother, "or height, for I have rejected him." And then these important words: "The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Now, I don't want to talk about that in particular, but what I do want to emphasize and highlight here is even Samuel, the great prophet, was stuck in the way that he viewed people. And it was until God changed that, he shifted something, that even Samuel could go into a new season with the Lord. He could see David as a possibility. I started thinking about my life and I realized that there's been so many times where my attachments of my beliefs have either kept me stuck, or I've imprisoned other people and not allowed God to move through other people into my life, or something of the sort. And until you and I can allow this to shift, until you and I can allow, we can sort of release those attachments that we have, and it might be different for all of us. It's until that happens that we can, really receive peace coming into our lives. So here's a simple question for you. You don't have to answer me. One, we don't have time for it. But two, I want you to simply reflect on it. You can come and talk to me afterwards if you want to. But what are the attachments of beliefs that you might have in your life that are keeping you stuck in a certain season with God or with other people, or that's keeping you stuck in a certain spiritual season? What are the attachments of beliefs that you might have? Things that you've been carrying through for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and every time you face that one thing, it creates heartache, or it creates turmoil, or it creates a sense of frustration or something. Because perhaps the time is now for you to think about that, and perhaps time is now to release some of those things and realize that having inner peace and just having the life that God wants us to have is much more important than holding on to stuff for the sake of whatever. See, ultimately our attachments are the source of all our problems. It's not just attachments of belief that we have. I'll give you a short other list, and I can give it to you afterwards if you want it. But I realize that we also have other attachments, things we cling to. And as long as you and I cling to these things, and this is vitally important, as long as we cling to them, they'll keep forcing peace out of our lives. They'll keep forcing that inner rest that we want out of our lives, because we'll keep chasing as long as we hold on to these. Here's a couple. The need to be right and the need to win at all cost. Some people are driven by that, and they keep on chasing, and as long as you're driven by that, as long as you hold on to it, it'll just push peace out. Another need is the need to control things and people. Here's a big one for me. I've realized looking at my life last year, the reason why I had so much frustration is I wanted to control my future way more than I'm able. Because I'm unable to control my future in a sense. I wanted to control people around me, especially my children. They need to be a certain way and they need to behave a certain way. Even though verbally I would say, no, they're beings in their own right and they're on their own journey. But when push came to shove, it's they need to do like I say. And I want to talk about not disciplining them. Of course you need to discipline your children and guide them. But we also need to realize that you and I cannot control other people. Doesn't matter what you think. I'm sorry if I'm boosting your bubble and you've been married for 50 years. Maybe you know this. But you cannot control your wife. You cannot control your husband. I've learned that in the first couple of years of marriage. That doesn't work. But it's not about that. It's about the fact that as long as you and I pursue this need to control, peace will elude us. Because you'll always have the frustration of not being able to control. Another need is this need to be seen, or this need to feel better or wealthier or more superior than other people. See, some people's lives are driven by this need to be better, this need to be better than others, this need to be wealthy, and therefore they have this need to always do more and have more, and their life is driven by it. The problem with that is, as long as you're clinging on to that need, peace will elude you. Because there will always be someone that's wealthier than you, better than you, faster than you, stronger than you, that does more than you, that have more than you. The moment we allow our happiness and our peace to rely on these things, it will elude us. And we need to allow God to help us to release that need, those attachments, to let it go in order to allow peace to come in. I've kind of run out of time, but I want to share with you just these two verses. In the scriptures, Jesus, taught a couple of things, and he said these famous words, and it just again became, I had it sort of revealed itself in a different way to me this week. He said that if you cling to life, to your life, you will lose it. And if you let your life go, you will save it. Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? But there is a very, very important spiritual principle in this that I've been trying to teach you this morning. It seems that it's not just enough for you and I to have an open mind, to see more, believe differently, but also to release the things that we cling on to. Because Jesus said if we cling on to life, if we want to control our lives, if we want to hold on to it at all cost, we will lose it. But it's only when you and I get to a season and a place in life where we let it go, literally let it go, that we seek to receive more of it. There's a different passage where he talks about material stuff in the same sense. You all know this, you can go and read it, Matthew 6, where he says, don't store stuff on earth that is where moths can eat it and rust can destroy it and thieves can steal it, but store in a place where all these things can't happen to them. So don't store stuff that's finite. Store in a place where things are infinite, where things are unlimited. So in a sense, you and I need to stop holding on to stuff. We need to release and we need to let go. You need to release the things that you're attached to in order to go into a new season to allow peace to come into your life. I'll close with this cool quote. Some of you will read this because I see some of you are already thinking about that cup of coffee and that's cool. But this quote is hard to understand initially until you start thinking about it. The quote says, infinite patience produces immediate results. Again, it sounds like a paradox, so I'll read to you what one guy said about it. This is what it means. Infinite patience implies an absolute certainty that what you desire and what you need and what you prayed for will indeed show up in the perfect order and exactly on time. The immediate result you receive from this inner knowing is a sense of peace. When you detach from the outcome, you are at peace and you'll ultimately see the fruits of your conviction. Let me put it like this. I cleaned out my veggie garden yesterday because it was a mess. The weeds were this high and there were no vegetables. Not because, no, just because I already harvested them, you see. But here's what I thought about as I was cleaning my veggie garden. See, when I planted those seeds at the start of the season, I did not go and sit beside those boxes willing those seeds to grow, thinking them into growing, sitting there every day, every minute, worrying that they won't grow. What did I do? I planted them and I left. I planted them and I left. And this is exactly what I'm trying to get you guys to understand this morning. Inner peace is reliant on that spiritual principle. Is where you and I, we go to God and we pray expectantly. We go to Him and we ask for things. We live life fully every day, but we are not attached to the outcome. See, if I spent all my time sitting next to the veggie garden worrying about whether they'll grow, whether the weeds will get them, whether they'll come up or not, whether I gave them enough water or not, I would have lost a lot of time. Ultimately, sometimes you and I in life need to plant the seed and just allow it to grow. Let go and let God. Hey guys, thank you for watching this week, and thank you for stopping by. I know that we're all in different seasons and all on different journeys in life, and I know that not everything that I say connects with everyone, but hopefully you got something out of what I said this week, and hopefully something of what I said served you and will help you improve your life and just start living the life that you were meant to live, the life that God gave you, and using it to your fullest potential. Guys, I hope to connect with you at some stage. This is an open invitation. We're meeting every week in Trinity here in Tukipunga in Whangarei. If you're not in New Zealand and you're watching this from overseas, well, hopefully I can connect with you on our website and also on our Facebook page. But regardless of irrespective of how we do this, hopefully we can talk sometime. I would love to hear your comments and your questions. Please post them and I will make videos to answer them in person. And yeah, I'll just keep on updating these videos and keep on bringing you these weekly teachings to really serve you, because this is what I'm passionate about. It's about serving people and it's about teaching. So guys, as I always say, until I see you again, go out, live strong, live with passion, and may God bless you. See ya.